Sarah Martinez had been tracking the wounded deer for 3 hours through the dense Oregon forest. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering Douglas firs, casting long shadows across the forest floor. As an experienced wildlife tracker and conservationist, she knew something was wrong the moment she found the first blood trail near Cascade Creek. The blood wasn't normal. It was too dark, too thick, and there was far too much of it scattered across the pine needles and fallen leaves. Sarah knelt down, her weathered hands examining the crimson stains more closely. In her 20 years of tracking injured animals, she had never seen anything quite like this pattern. Her German shepherd, Max, whined softly beside her, his ears pinned back against his head. The dog's behavior troubled her even more than the blood trail. Max was trained to track wounded animals, but today he seemed reluctant to follow the scent. Every few steps he would stop and look back at Sarah with worried brown eyes, as if pleading with her to turn around. Sarah ignored her growing unease and pressed forward. The trail led deeper into the forest, away from the main hiking paths and into an area she rarely visited. The trees grew thicker here, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the remaining daylight. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and an eerie silence settled over the woods. As she followed the blood trail around a massive fallen log, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. Mixed in with the deer tracks were human footprints. But these weren't the prints of hiking boots or sneakers. They were bare feet, and they were enormous, easily size 15 or 16. The toes were spread unnaturally wide, and the heel marks were deeper than any human print should be. Max began to growl low in his throat, the fur along his spine standing up in a ridge. Sarah had never seen her faithful companion so agitated. She reached for the radio clipped to her belt, thinking she should call for backup, but realized she was too far from the ranger station to get a signal. The blood trail continued for another 100 yards before Sarah came upon a small clearing. What she saw there made her legs shake so violently she had to grab on to a nearby tree trunk for support. In the center of the clearing lay the deer, but it wasn't just dead. It had been completely torn apart. The animal had been ripped limb from limb with a violence that defied explanation. But that wasn't the worst part. Surrounding the deer's remains were more of those massive human footprints, along with what looked like the impressions of huge hands pressed into the soft earth. Sarah's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. No human could have done this kind of damage to a full-grown deer, and no animal she knew of would leave behind human-like prints. As she stood there trying to make sense of the scene, a twig snapped somewhere behind her in the forest. Sarah spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Max was now barking frantically, spinning in circles as if he couldn't decide which direction the threat was coming from. Through the trees, Sarah caught a glimpse of something moving. It was tall, much taller than any person, and covered in dark, matted hair. For just a moment, she thought she saw it watching her with intelligent, almost human eyes. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows between the trees like it had never been there at all. Sarah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip her camera as she tried to document the scene. She managed to take several photos of the footprints and the deer's remains before Max's increasingly frantic behavior convinced her it was time to leave. The dog was now pulling at his leash, desperate to get away from the clearing. As they hurried back through the forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them. Several times she heard branches breaking in the distance, always staying just out of sight. Max kept looking back over his shoulder, his tail tucked between his legs. By the time they reached Sarah's truck, the sun had set completely. She fumbled with the keys, her hand still trembling from what she had witnessed. As she started the engine and pulled away from the forest access road, she caught sight of a massive shadow standing at the edge of the tree line in her rearview mirror. That night, Sarah sat in her small cabin reviewing the photos she had taken. On her computer screen, the images looked even more disturbing than they had in person. The footprints were clearly visible, and in one photo she could make out what looked like claw marks on the trunk of a nearby tree. Claw marks that were 8 feet off the ground. She tried calling the local sheriff's office, but how could she explain what she had found? Who would believe her story about giant footprints and something inhuman stalking through the forest? Sarah had always been a rational person, grounded in science and facts. But what she had seen that day challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. As she prepared for bed, Sarah double-checked all the locks on her doors and windows. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and every sound made her jump. She had the uncomfortable feeling that her discovery in the forest had changed everything, and that whatever was out there now knew she had found its secret. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of glowing eyes watching her from the darkness and the sound of something large moving through the forest just outside her cabin. When she woke the next morning, Sarah found massive footprints in the soft earth around her home. Sarah stared at the massive footprints surrounding her cabin in the pale morning light. Each print was perfectly clear in the damp soil, showing the distinctive spread toes and deep heel impressions she had seen in the forest. A coffee mug slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering on the wooden porch steps. Max whined and pressed close to her legs, refusing to leave the safety of the cabin. Even in daylight, the dog sensed something was terribly wrong. Sarah counted at least 12 distinct footprints forming a rough circle around her home. Whatever had made them had been watching her while she slept. She called in sick to the Forest Service for the first time in 5 years. There was no way she could focus on routine park maintenance when something this extraordinary was happening. Instead, she spent the morning researching similar incidents online, diving deep into forums and databases that she had always dismissed as fringe nonsense. What she found made her blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, there had been 17 reports of animal attacks in a 50-mile radius around her location. Deer, elk, and even a black bear had been found torn apart with the same brutal efficiency she had witnessed. Game wardens had blamed wolves or a rogue mountain lion, but Sarah now suspected something far more sinister. Dr. James Chen, a wildlife biologist from Portland State University, had been quietly investigating these attacks for weeks. Sarah found his academic papers online and decided to reach out. When she called his office, his secretary said he was in the field, but she managed to get his cell phone number. Dr. Chen, my name is Sarah Martinez. I work for the Forest Service, and I think I found evidence related to your animal attack research. There was a long pause before he responded. What kind of evidence? Sarah described what she had found in the forest, carefully sticking to the facts. She mentioned the unusual footprints and the systematic way the deer had been dismantled. She didn't mention the shadowy figure she thought she had seen watching her. Can you meet me at the location this afternoon? Dr. Chen asked, his voice suddenly urgent. I've been documenting similar scenes, but I've never found clear prints before. They agreed to meet at the Forest Access Road at 3 o'clock. Sarah spent the rest of the morning preparing her equipment and reviewing her photographs. She also made copies of everything and stored them in multiple locations, including a cloud backup service. Something told her this evidence might be important. Dr. Chen arrived in a mud-splattered jeep filled with scientific equipment. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in his early 30s, with intense dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He brought along his graduate student, Rebecca Torres, and a documentary photographer named Michael Kim. I have to warn you, Dr. Chen said as they hiked toward the clearing. What we've been finding doesn't match any known animal behavior. I've consulted with experts across the country, and nobody can explain these attack patterns. The clearing looked different in daylight, somehow less threatening but equally mysterious. The deer's remains had been scattered by scavengers overnight, but the massive footprints were still clearly visible in several patches of soft earth. Chen and his team immediately began documenting everything with scientific precision.
These prints are incredible, Rebecca whispered, kneeling beside the clearest impression.
The stride length suggests something over 8 feet tall, but the foot structure is almost human. Michael's camera clicked constantly as he captured the scene from every angle. I've photographed crime scenes for 20 years, he said quietly, but I've never seen anything like this kind of damage to an animal. Dr. CQ felt that this passage could probably. Chen was examining the claw marks Sarah had noticed on the nearby tree trunk. These gouges go right through the bark into the heartwood, he said, measuring their depth with a ruler. Whatever made these has incredible strength. A grizzly bear couldn't cut this deep. As they worked, Sarah noticed that Max had disappeared. She called for him repeatedly, but the German shepherd didn't return. The dog had never wandered off during a tracking expedition before, and his absence added to Sarah's growing anxiety. We should make plaster casts of these footprints, Dr. Chen said, unpacking supplies from his backpack. This could be the breakthrough we need to identify what's causing these attacks. While Rebecca mixed the plaster, Michael climbed onto the fallen log to get aerial shots of the scene. Suddenly, he froze, his camera hanging forgotten around his neck. Guys, he said in a strained voice, you need to see this. From his elevated position, Michael could see deeper into the forest beyond the clearing. About 50 yards away, partially hidden by a cluster of ancient cedar trees, was what looked like a crude shelter made from woven branches and moss. It was large enough for something human-sized to inhabit, but built with a primitive construction technique that spoke of intelligence combined with wild behavior. The team approached the structure cautiously. Up close, it was even more unsettling. The shelter was roughly 8 feet tall and 10 feet across, constructed with an engineering skill that seemed beyond animal capability, but too crude for human work. Inside, they found disturbing evidence of habitation. Scattered bones from various animals littered the floor, all showing the same systematic dismantling they had seen with the deer. But there were also human artifacts. A torn piece of fabric that looked like it came from hiking gear, a broken compass, and, most disturbing of all, a driver's license belonging to a hiker who had been reported missing 3 weeks earlier. "We need to contact law enforcement immediately," Dr. Chen said, his scientific calm finally cracking. "This isn't just about animal attacks anymore." Sarah used her satellite phone to call the sheriff's office while the others continued documenting the shelter. As she explained what they had found to the dispatcher, she heard Max barking frantically somewhere in the distance. The sound was coming from deeper in the forest, and it carried a note of terror she had never heard from her dog before. "Max!" she called, but the barking suddenly stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Rebecca was examining something else inside the shelter. "There are more footprints here," she said, "but these are different, smaller. There might be more than one of them." As if responding to her words, a low growling sound echoed through the forest around them. It wasn't coming from any single direction. It seemed to surround them completely. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, deeper than a bear's growl, but with an almost human quality that raised the hair on the back of her neck. Michael grabbed his camera equipment while Dr. Chen quickly packed the plaster casts that were still setting. "We should leave," he said urgently. "Now." But as they turned to head back toward the main trail, Sarah saw something that made her heart stop. Standing at the edge of the clearing, watching them with intelligent brown eyes, was the creature she had glimpsed the day before. In full daylight, there was no mistaking what she was seeing. It stood nearly 9 feet tall on 2 legs, covered in dark brown hair that seemed to absorb the filtered sunlight. Its face was a disturbing blend of human and ape features, with a prominent brow ridge and a mouthful of yellowed teeth. Most unsettling of all were its eyes. They held an unmistakable intelligence, studying the humans with what looked like curiosity mixed with hostility. For several seconds, neither the creature nor the research team moved. Then, with surprising grace for something so large, it turned and melted back into the forest, leaving only the sound of breaking branches to mark its passage. "Did everyone see that?" Dr. Chen whispered. They all nodded, too stunned to speak. Sarah's legs were shaking again, just as they had when she first discovered the deer's remains. But this time, she wasn't alone with her terror. 3 other people had witnessed the impossible, and now they all shared the burden of knowing that something extraordinary and dangerous was living in the Oregon wilderness. As they hurried back to their vehicles, none of them noticed the multiple pairs of eyes watching them from the shadows between the trees. The sheriff's department took Dr. Pitsuo Chen's report seriously, especially after they found Max's collar hanging from a tree branch near the creature's shelter. Sarah's heart broke when she saw the torn leather stained with blood that could have belonged to her faithful companion. The dog's body was never found, but the message was clear. They were dealing with something that saw humans and their animals as threats to be eliminated. Sheriff Maria Gonzalez organized a search team that included state wildlife officials, FBI agents specializing in unusual crimes, and a tracker from the local Native American tribe. Elder Joseph Whitehorse examined the plaster casts and photographs with a grim expression that suggested he recognized what they were dealing with. "My grandfather told stories about the forest giants," he said quietly, running his weathered fingers over the footprint impressions. "We called them the hairy ones. They lived in the deepest parts of the mountains, avoiding human contact. But when their territory is threatened, they defended." The FBI agents were skeptical until they examined the physical evidence. Agent Sandra Mills, a forensic specialist with 20 years of experience, admitted that the footprints and claw marks defied conventional explanation. "The bone structure suggested by these prints is unlike any known primate," she said, "but the intelligence implied by the shelter construction indicates something far beyond typical wildlife behavior." Dr. Chen had contacted colleagues across the country, and similar reports were emerging from other remote forest areas. A pattern was becoming clear. As human development pushed deeper into wilderness areas, encounters with these creatures were becoming more frequent and more violent. "They're not just defending territory, Doctor," Chen explained to the assembled team. They're actively hunting. The missing hiker, the systematic animal kills, the way they've been watching Sarah's cabin, this suggests coordinated behavior by multiple individuals. Sarah had barely slept since Max's disappearance. Every night, she heard sounds outside her cabin, footsteps on her porch, scratching at her walls, and once, the unmistakable sound of something trying to turn her door handle. She had moved to a hotel in town, but even there she didn't feel safe. The search team established a base camp near the access road and began a systematic exploration of the forest. They found 3 more shelters, each more sophisticated than the last. The creatures had created a network of living spaces connected by barely visible trails that avoided all human paths. Evidence suggested a family group of at least 5 individuals, including what appeared to be juveniles based on smaller footprint sizes. On the 4th day of the search, Rebecca made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a cave system about 2 miles from the original clearing, she found what could only be described as a burial ground. Dozens of animal skeletons were arranged in careful patterns, along with human artifacts dating back decades, backpacks, clothing, camping equipment, and personal items from hikers who had vanished in the area over the years. This isn't random predation, Doctor, Chen said, examining the arranged bones. This is ritual behavior. They're not just intelligent, they have a culture. The discovery attracted national attention. News crews arrived from Portland and Seattle, and the forest was flooded with curiosity seekers and cryptozoology enthusiasts. The creatures responded to the human invasion by becoming more aggressive. Campers reported objects thrown at their tents during the night, and several hikers claimed to have been followed by large shapes moving through the trees. Sheriff Gonzalez made the difficult decision to close the entire forest area to civilian access, but the media attention had already drawn the wrong kind of people: trophy hunters who saw the creatures as the ultimate prize, and thrill seekers who wanted to capture video footage for social media fame. On a foggy morning exactly 1 week after Sarah's original discovery, everything came to a head. A group of armed hunters had ignored the closure order and tracked the creatures to their main shelter. What they found waiting for them was not a single creature, but an entire family group that had apparently been coordinating their response to the human intrusion. The lead hunter, a man named Carl Morrison, later described the encounter to investigators from his hospital bed. "They came from all directions," he said, his voice shaking. "The big one, the male, he just walked right up to us like he wasn't afraid of our guns." The others spread out in a circle. They were communicating with each other, making these low sounds that were almost like talking. Morrison's hunting partner hadn't been so lucky. They found his body 3 hours later, not torn apart like the animal victims, but carefully placed in a clearing as if the creatures wanted it to be found. It was a clear message: stay away from our territory, or face the consequences. Sarah was part of the team that recovered the hunter's body. As they worked, she felt eyes watching her from the forest. When she looked up, she saw the creature she had first encountered standing at the edge of the clearing. This time, instead of fleeing, it stepped forward. The massive being approached slowly, its intelligent eyes fixed on Sarah's face. The rest of the recovery team froze, hands moving instinctively toward their weapons, but Sarah held up her hand to stop them. Something in the creature's posture suggested it wasn't planning an attack. When it was about 10 feet away, the creature stopped and made a series of low, rumbling sounds. It reached into what appeared to be a crude pouch made from animal hide and withdrew something that made Sarah's legs shake for the final time. It was Max's collar, but now it was clean and carefully repaired with plant fibers. The creature placed the collar on the ground between them and stepped back. Then it made more sounds, and Sarah realized with shock that the tones were almost like speech. The creature was trying to communicate, and its message seemed to be both an apology and a warning. Elder Whitehorse later interpreted the encounter. "It was showing respect for your bond with the dog," he explained, "but also making it clear that further intrusions will not be tolerated. They've chosen to reveal themselves to warn us away rather than continue the violence." The federal government ultimately declared the area a protected wilderness zone, off limits to all human access. Official reports classified the incidents as attacks by an unknown species of large primate, but the full truth was shared only with a select group of scientists and government officials. Dr. Chen published a carefully worded academic paper about unidentified hominid activity in Pacific Northwest forests, that generated intense debate in scientific circles. Sarah returned to her work with the Forest Service, but she was assigned to a different region far from the creature's territory. Years later, she still thought about that final encounter almost daily. She had been privileged to witness something extraordinary. A species that had somehow survived in the modern world while remaining hidden from mainstream humanity. The creatures had demonstrated intelligence, social organization, and even a form of moral reasoning in their treatment of Max's collar. But Sarah also understood the tragedy of the situation. As human development continued to expand into remote wilderness areas, encounters like hers would become more frequent. The creatures had revealed themselves not by choice, but out of necessity. Their ancient territory was shrinking, and they were being forced to defend what remained of their world. She kept Max's repaired collar in a frame on her wall, a reminder of the day she discovered that the world still held mysteries beyond human understanding. Sometimes, late at night, she wondered if the creatures were still out there, still watching, still protecting their shrinking domain from the encroachment of civilization. The official files remained classified, but Sarah knew the truth. In the deep forests of Oregon, an ancient intelligence continued to survive, adapting to a world that was slowly closing in around them. Her legs had shaken with terror that first day, but now she felt something different when she thought about the creatures, a profound respect for their struggle to survive, and a deep sadness for what might happen when their hidden world could no longer remain secret.